Now, the subject of today's webinar is particularly important. What you learn at school often stays with you for the rest of your life. So it's very important that political indoctrination at schools is avoided, and that when political issues are discussed, they're discussed in a balanced way. And this point is actually recognised in legislation in England and Wales. Section 406 of the Education Act of 1996 forbids the promotion of partisan political views in the teaching of any subject at a publicly maintained school. And it also prohibits the pursuit of partisan political activities by junior pupils of publicly maintained schools, either on school premises or even off school premises in activities organised by school staff. And Section 407 of the same Act requires publicly maintained schools to secure a balanced presentation of opposing views where political issues are brought to the attention of pupils while they're in attendance at a maintained school or while they're taking part in extracurricular activities organised by the school off school premises. But the best of laws is no good if it's not observed or enforced. So today we're going to discuss whether there's a significant problem in schools in the UK and elsewhere regarding the discussion of Israel and the Middle East, and if so, what can be done about it. I'm delighted to introduce our exceptional panel. Noru Tsalic writes the incisive blog, Politically Incorrect Politics. I'm just trying to see if I can show him up on the screen for you, but you'll see him soon enough. He recently carried out a review for UKLFI of a textbook produced by Hodder for the GCSE history course, Conflict in the Middle East, 1945 to 95. And for the assistance of viewers outside the UK, this is an optional course taught to children up to 16 years old in English schools. In the light of Noru's review, which found major anti-Israel bias, Hodder has withdrawn the current version of this book. David Collier is now well known as a researcher into anti-Semitism in the UK. He carried out a review for UKLFI and the Zionist Federation of a textbook produced by Pearson for their international GCSE course, the Middle East Conflict, Crisis and Change, 1917 to 2012. As a result of this review, which also found serious bias against Israel, Pearson have withdrawn and are revising this book, and another book on the same GCSE course as covered by the Hodder book, which was reviewed by Noru. Marcus Sheff is Chief Executive of Impact SE, an organisation which analyses school textbooks by reference to standards on peace and tolerance derived from international direct declarations and resolutions. Impact SE has reported on textbooks and curricula of the Palestinian Authority, Israeli Haredi schools, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, Turkey, Iran, and other countries. Nomi Benari runs the organisation Middle East Edu that gives talks on the Middle East in British schools, seeking to present the issues in a balanced and accurate way, directly to students. And I should say that the Academic Study Group also organises talks for senior pupils at UK schools, again, in normal times once schools get back to operation. So ladies and gentlemen, that is your panel, and I'm going to start our discussion by looking at textbooks before moving on to other ways in which education is delivered. So Noru, can you give us some examples of the problems you found with the Hodder book?
I'd love to, and actually, if you want examples, it's easier to show than to speak about them. So let me share my screen here. Okay, so this is the book. As Jonathan said, it's a GCSE textbook, and it purports to teach about the Arab-Israeli conflict starting from 1945, except that they must have realized at some point that you can't start from 1945 because it would be completely incomprehensible to students without the background. And so what they did is they almost as an afterthought, they introduced some tiny bit of background, and here it is. And it starts with this very weird sentence: the problem of Palestine dates back thousands of years and involves the rival claims of Jews and Arabs to the area. So basically, Jews and Arabs have been fighting there for thousands of years. What utter nonsense to teach some students. And then if you see this small paragraph here, this is more than 3,000 years of Jewish history crammed in there. Okay, nowhere, not just in this paragraph, but nowhere in the book is there anything about the millennia-old attachment of Jews to the land of Israel, about the importance of the land of Israel, of Jerusalem in Judaism, or indeed in Islam. How can anyone understand anything about this conflict without knowing that kind of background? And then there's bias. You can see the authors are in love with the phrase Jewish terrorist. They use it repeatedly. They never use Arab terrorist or Palestinian terrorist. Pictures. Pictures are worth, each picture is worth 1,000 words. And pictures in this book almost invariably portray Jews as terrorists, bent on violence, aggressors. You can see some of the pictures are really gory. You can, it's not hard to imagine the emotional impact of that kind of picture on a 15-year-old. And the activities only reinforce that image of Jews as violent people, aggressors, and so on. On the other hand, when Arabs or Palestinians are portrayed in pictures, they are shown as innocent victims. And then there's even a little bit of flirtation with anti-Semitism. I mean, not perhaps hardcore anti-Semitism, but certainly a big bit of dog whistling, a bit of prejudice there. You can see here in 1945 in USA, there was increasing support for the idea of a Jewish state. And why, reason the authors? Because of a large and powerful Jewish community. Jews represented in 1945 3.5% of the US population. Certainly not a large community, and not a particularly powerful community either. We must realize, we must remember that in 1945, there was quite a bit of overt anti-Semitism in that part of the world. So these are just a few examples, Jonathan. I could give you hundreds. Utter, blatant mistakes, inaccuracies, a lot of bias, and just a general lack of rigor and of scholarship. This is a badly conceived, scantily researched, and just even badly written book.
Well, can I pick up, Noru, your reference to anti-Semitism and the indications of what you describe as slight anti-Semitism, and ask David, who's researched into anti-Semitism more generally, do you see any connection between anti-Semitism and the bias that you found in the Pearson textbook, either cause or effect, or perhaps both?
Well, first of all, if you'd have asked me to answer the question that Noru just answered, I would have given you pretty much exactly the same answer over an entirely different book written by another author. I mean, this is the book that I was looking at, the one with Arafat on the front cover. And I think this is the issue here. The author believes that she wrote a completely unbiased textbook. The idea that it's not like she was sitting down planning how to put propaganda into the book. This is their world vision, which is why the book that Noru looked at and the book that I looked at are effectively identical. And it's not a question so much of cause and effect. It's all coming from, it's all coming from a self-perpetuating paradigm working into the schools, teaching the children, who then go on to university, who then become teachers themselves, who then write these books. And the anti-Semitism it's on every page, because it's looking at the Jews as something they're not. It's looking at the conflict as more than it was. And a lot of the writing in the book, like with the book with Noru, the Palestinians are always the victims. It's always Jewish terrorists. They throw the words Irgun and Lechi and Stern around all the time, repetitive, like a drumbeat, so that the children will learn these words. And Arafat is always played out as the person who wants peace. So the paradigm itself, the mindset from which the book is created, is the same mindset that we're seeing repeated across in the Labour Party, in the hard left. It's this alliance where anti-Semitism is coming from. So absolutely there is a connection between simple misrepresentations of the historical truth in a textbook and the anti-Semitism that we're seeing on the streets in the CLPs of the Labour Party.
Okay, can I just mention to everyone, there are 1 or 2 people commenting that the reception is not brilliant at times. So if we can all try to speak as clearly as we possibly can to cope with the internet, which is of course overloaded in these times. But can I pick up now with you, Marcus? We've had a bit of a look at the situation in the UK. What's it like in the Middle East and North Africa, where you've been looking as regards textbooks that are used in schools?
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, Impact SE has been looking at textbooks across the Middle East, across North Africa for 20 years now. And year on year, being able to revisit books has given us a fairly good idea of trend lines. And I think it's fair to say at this moment in time, there are improvements in the region from countries which actually you would expect. Just to give you an example, the Jordanian textbooks have been completely rewritten. In 2014, a new curriculum emerged after King Abdullah's Amman statements of 2004 and the Amman Agreement of 2005. And within Islamic studies, a lot of the radicalization was taken out. Unfortunately, we haven't seen such great improvements in relation to how the Jordanian books talk about Israel and how the Jordanian books talk about Jerusalem, but there is a positive trend line. The Tunisian books have been of a decent standard in relation to those UNESCO standards for some time now. The Moroccan books, we understand, are in the process of being improved. King Mohammed VI is committed to this. We will, of course, review them when we see them. Not all is rosy in the garden. The Iranian textbooks are as appalling as you would imagine. They put forward a paranoid view of the world, Iranian hegemony as absolutely essential. Anti-Semitism is rife in those books. The Syrian textbooks are bizarre in many ways, written during the Syrian civil war, while not even talking about the civil war when they were written. Again, anti-Semitism in those books, terrible anti-Israel positions, as you would imagine. We also actually see interesting, historical ideas, a closeness to Russia in those Syrian books, whereas not such a closeness to Iran. So, does that mean that after the civil war, the Russians are staying, the Iranians are going? Interesting questions. The Israeli textbooks, by the way, which we review pretty much every time a new tranche of books come out, will be considered pretty left-wing. They certainly are by many Israeli parents, and they would be by I believe, many of the people on this call. They talk very clearly about the Palestinian other, not just culturally, but nationally as well, including, by the way, the Nakba. And peacemaking as the way to resolve conflict is absolutely key within those Israeli textbooks. Haredi textbooks need improvement. They do not incite, and I think this is very important. Haredim are, at the end of the day, fairly pacifist, I think it's fair to say. And so, there is no incitement to violence, but what there is a distrust of the other. which needs to change. But we are particularly focused on the Palestinian books. And Jonathan, would you like me to discuss that now or another round?
I think we'll come to the Palestinian ones specifically later, because I'll ask you about what's currently happening and whether any progress is being made. But in the meanwhile, could you perhaps offer an insight into your methodology? How do you ensure that reviews of textbooks are empirical and objective, and are seen as empirical and objective, and can't be dismissed as some kind of biased Israeli right-wing, left-wing, whatever viewpoint?
Absolutely, and this is key. So we look at textbooks through UNESCO-derived standards of peace and tolerance. These are UNESCO and UN declarations coming from various conferences, various meetings over a period of decades, which specify specifically how textbooks and how education should be presented. The key is, of course, respect for the other, respect for the individual other, which is slightly different. It goes more to affection and love, if you like. Peacemaking is the way to resolve conflict. Unbiased information, that is, I believe in the UK, probably the most important of the standards which you're looking at, and always the most difficult to take on. Gender equality, sound prosperity and cooperation. We also utilize LGBTQ standards, although that is not a UNESCO standard, because as you know, many countries in UNESCO have absolutely no support for LGBTQ rights whatsoever. But the key is to look at every textbook through the same prism, ultimately, so that you moving through books, moving through years, you are always using the same methodologies. And I would just add one more thing. I think we all know how important textbooks are, how authoritative they are. They carry the values which states wish to pass on. They describe national identity. In the Middle East, even more so. Kal v'chomer, as we say in Hebrew. The average Middle Eastern nation, so take away Israel, really, there's one textbook for 1 year for one grade. There is no choice. So when we talk about curriculum and textbook, we're pretty much talking about the same thing. And often for many students in the Middle East, these are the only books they will have. They have the seal of the state on them. And students understand very clearly, pupils understand very clearly that it comes from the state, it is the word of the state, it is delivered in a state building by a state employee. So their power is really quite great. And that means that they have this incredible power to radicalize. And that is what they certainly have done with Palestinian children, and they do with other children in the region.
Right. Because I suppose there's something of a difference there between some of the states where you're looking in the UK, where it's not quite so state-controlled and state-orientated, and but nevertheless, textbooks are important, of course, in the UK. But it is fair to say that there are other ways in which education is delivered, even in the Middle East and North Africa, but certainly in the UK. And I'd now like to bring in Nomi. Can you talk about where teachers do get their knowledge from, apart from textbooks?
Yeah, okay. Well, I counted about 8 sources altogether, but before I talk about them, can I first explain the system here? Because it's not only the textbooks. The textbooks are the visible end of the whole process. There are, I think, 3 major boards of education boards, and there are others as well, and they all have to follow the strict guidelines of Ofqual. Now, Ofqual appoint the boards, all the people on the boards, and they decide the syllabus. They provide, in addition to textbooks, the teacher's guide. And they are very important because most teachers are pretty ignorant about what's going on in the Middle East, so they're important to them. But of even more importance is the marking schemes. Now, the marking schemes work like this. the board decides what has to go into the book, or into the curriculum, rather, and how it should be handled. And it allocates how many marks. So you might get 5 marks for talking about, you know, British colonialism, maybe, unlikely, or before the 6-Day War, the War of Independence, the Nakba, all this. And they lay down how it has to be handled. So if a textbook is written and includes the 3 no's from Khartoum, from the Arab League, or if speakers like ourselves go in and talk about this, and a very good student listens and learns and writes it in his exam, he won't get a single mark for it because it's not in the list of topics which have to be handled. So these boards are terribly important. So the board members will sit and discuss and write down the syllabus. They will also write the exam papers, and then afterwards they will go around the country checking that the subject is being taught the way they want it to be taught. So it isn't just the textbooks. We have to look at the marking schemes. We have to look at the teacher's guidance. As I said, there are 3 major exam boards. The only one which is private is Pearson's, and they have they do their own publishing, which makes it much easier for them to change things and so on. The others are all charities. So other people can offer to write textbooks, like Noru might offer his book to Hodder, and they might accept it. But unless it's actually got the Sheff from Ofqual, it'll be printed, it'll be offered to the schools, but it'll go out more cheaply, and schools will know it's not quite as reliable as one which the boards have approved of. And they will only approve 1 book out of the many that are around. And there are many books, and there's not just the books, there are also revision books. On every subject there will be a revision book, which students found, well, I know my grandsons found very nice because they're shorter, they're easier to read, easier to remember, and so on. But they're all very important. Another source of information, if you like, is newspapers. We have a kind of a game. We go into a school and we see what newspapers on the coffee table, and we can guess what kind of reception we're going to have. Is it a left-wing paper? Is it a right-wing paper? And we're usually right. Other sources are Google, Wikipedia. A lot of students will actually go online, and teachers as well, to get extra information. But I'm sure we all know, I don't think any of you have used it recently, they are terrible. You have to really scroll down to find anything which isn't anti-Israel. And that, I think, is a totally different subject, but I really think that should be looked at by somebody, because it's very easy to change them and rewrite them. So why aren't we doing it? And then there are, of course, privately published books. I suppose we can't do anything about that, but somebody is writing them, publishing them, and somebody is buying them. Now, why do they buy them if they're not interested? So they all somehow have to be looked at. And finally, visiting speakers. You spoke of one organization. There is another one like us who sends a Muslim and a Jew together in Glasgow, and I know there's another one based in London, and there are various individuals. So I think that sums it up. The book which you reviewed, Noru, I went on Hodder's website yesterday, and it's still offered on sale. There was a button saying, you know, press here to buy. So I don't know what's going on there. That needs looking at. Maybe it's not, you know, maybe if I'd gone through it, I wouldn't have been able to, I don't know. And if it's been withdrawn, does that mean that the teachers who have got it have been told never to use it again, or is it still out there? There's an awful lot we don't know. We have to really think about. So yeah, I can talk about what we do if you want, if I've got time. Have I, Jonathan?
Yes, well, I was going to ask about your talks, which I think was the last item on your list, and what happens and how schools respond to them.
Okay, right. So I started this about 15 years ago. I took the name from a couple who were doing it in Leeds, Middle East education. I was lonely by myself. And I just talked about the Arab-Israeli conflict. And I found that there was a kind of resistance to facts. If I told them something which wasn't negative about Israel, you sort of saw them all, you know, they didn't like it. And I gradually devised what we call the me-do way. We never say something is or something isn't. We say, the Palestinians say, archaeologists say, lawyers, international lawyers say. And we always say, please don't believe a word we're telling you. Go and check for yourselves. So we're planting the idea that, you know, not everything they're told is true. And then I was lucky enough to be introduced to Sami. He's a Muslim from the Middle East. He's a refugee here, and he speaks perfect Arabic. It's his mother tongue. So he is able to talk a lot about what is really being said on television, radio, newspapers in the Middle East, where Arabic is, you know, is the mother tongue. This is unusual because most Muslims in this country are from, well, the Indian subcontinent, and they don't speak Arabic. So we now send Sami and either me or I've got Johnny who takes over from me when I haven't been well enough, and we send the two of them. Now this has the advantage that if, as you were talking about balance in the schools, if they have somebody who's pro-Israel, they have to, the next week, invite somebody who is pro-Palestinian. So we're at a disadvantage because we try and tell the truth and, you know, maybe the others don't. So yeah, we get 50 minutes, less than 50 minutes. A lesson is 50 minutes long. Well, you never get it all because by the time they all streamed in and had their notices and the IT people haven't sorted out the IT and so on, we get a lot less. So we can't hope to give them the whole history of Israel in less than 50 minutes. But what we do try to do is to at least make the point that there is another side, and maybe not everything they've been told is true. Usually the feedback is very good. We're now trying to book the autumn term in the hope that everything's back to normal by then. And one of them we got was, oh, Sami and Johnny were so good, we definitely want you back. On the other hand, I had something when I first did it by myself, where a teacher said to me, I know everything you said was true, but somehow I don't believe you. So go figure that one. So it also depends on the newspapers. It depends where we're invited. Now, usually it's because a teacher is teaching a history course and they don't have enough confidence, or maybe they just would like a week off and they'd like a visiting speaker to come and talk. Sometimes we get a response where they say, it was very good, thank you so much for coming. It will stimulate discussion. Now that's polite speak for, we don't believe you. It's not what we've been teaching the kids. So sometimes, and this is quite recent, last term, we went to a school, a church school, where over 50% were refugees from Syria. They weren't all Syrian, they'd come from other parts of the Arab world, and they spoke Arabic. And they all had their preset ideas. They knew what was right and what was wrong. And everything we said obviously was wrong. And most of the teachers didn't want to confront this. They didn't want to be accused of being racist, and they didn't want to upset the students. But there's one teacher there who said, no, I want you to come in and tell them that there is another side. Because these kids were spreading their views around the school. And she's actually, when we left, Sami said, no point ever going there again. They've all got their set ideas. But she said, please come back. She begged us, and we're going back again next September, October or something. So have I got time for one more example? This was a while ago.
Quickly, Nomi.
Yes, I'll be very quick. I'll be
got
right.
quite a lot of other questions now.
Okay, right. So it was in Hounslow, and the headmaster had invited us because he knew that not only the students were anti-Israel, but one of the teachers as well. And I was scared. I took somebody with me, and we brought along a friend who also came along to have a look. So there were three of us. And he invited us because the kids, during, I think, one of the intifadas, they were parading around the school with Palestinian flags, shouting, kill the Jews, kill the Jews. And as they left our talk, they were whispering, kill the Jews, kill the Jews. And it was, you know, so that gives you an overview of the different kinds of response we get. But on the whole, it's, you know, it's positive, and they invite us back every year. So we must be doing something right. Over and out.
Right. Well, perhaps I can be, because you've referred to the students having picked up other ideas and having preconceived views and so on. But perhaps can I turn to David now? You discovered an anti-Amnesty International boycott petition that was being promoted at a school in Derbyshire. And this led you to write an extensive report about Amnesty International. What was that about, and why did it so disturb you?
Right. Firstly, I stumbled on it. And I think this stumbling upon it actually tells the whole story. Because if I wasn't researching in secret groups, nobody would have ever known about it. And this would have just taken place, because we're a tiny minority. We exist in a few schools in specific areas, but in the great wide world out there, there are thousands and thousands of British schools without a single Jew, where effectively anti-Zionist information is spread. This was a school in Derby. It was an extracurricular sixth form group, Amnesty International, who brought a petition to school to support the Amnesty International Airbnb boycott. Now, they're not actually Amnesty members, or they produce some of the equipment themselves, the material themselves. And the photo on the website had a picture of the table where they had their information laid out. So I could see their fact sheet, the fact sheet that they were using to tell the students what was going on. And on the fact sheet was the 4 maps, you know, the disappearing Palestine maps. Now, this is taking place in a school. They received 500 signatures to that boycott petition. There's no way of correcting that damage. And this is why some of because I tell things as I see it, and some of this issue with the textbooks, it's almost like spitting in the wind. Because if there was an election tomorrow, schools only, Corbyn would be Prime Minister. Because that's where the mentality of the vast, vast majority of the teachers are. And they're the people who are teaching our children. And they're the ones that decide what's balanced and what isn't balanced. And the truth is, if I was to put down a factual book, they would consider it Zionist propaganda. Because what they perceive as being true, how they see the world, is so far shifted to the left. Because what's basically happened, and Marcus touched on this slightly, since the mid-1980s, the Zionist or the Jewish education, it's moved forward a generation. We know that we're not, there wasn't a virgin birth of Israel. We know that now. And with the revisionist historians and looking back at what took place, we've tidied up the history. So we know pretty much the way that things unfolded. So we've shifted a whole piece over to the center. And that's the starting point. They still consider that Zionist propaganda. And they're moving further to the left. We're dealing with something, teachers, schools, these groups, effectively poisoning the minds of children throughout the country. And the truth is, we can't touch it. We can't get at it. We can't be in the schools. We can't see what's going on, because those teachers, the teachers themselves, are the ones that are introducing a lot of the material. Which is why when I saw the amnesty thing, and we wrote to the school, we almost blanked. It was okay, they'll balance it out, they'll talk to the students later sometime, but 500 children had signed a petition after being presented with a racist fictitious map instructing them that it was ethical, moral to boycott the state of Israel. And you'll never find those 500 children, you'll never get them in a classroom together, and you'll never be able to repair that damage. That's why it annoyed me so much.
Yeah, incidentally, on the subject of the 4 maps, there is an excellent video produced by JTV, presented and composed by Kiki Hausdorff, which if anyone gets the opportunity to show, I'd highly recommend it. It makes the points very, very well. It has had a lot of views, but I don't know what the breakdown of the people who have been viewing it, and whether it would ever get to any of the students at that school in Derbyshire. But perhaps I can come on to ask a bit about, well, what can we do about it? So perhaps, Noru, what do you think can be done to remedy these problems that you've observed?
Okay, so let me just first of all say something, and I'm sorry, I know it's a cliche, but education is the most important thing in the whole world, because it's a matter of survival. Maybe not you know, us as individuals, but us as a culture, as a community. So I think we need to keep that in mind. Now, I'm going to approach your question. I served in the IDF, so I'm going to approach it as I do a military campaign on 2 levels. On the tactical level, I think we should be doing more of the same. And I know it's not a sexy answer, but I think it's the right answer. Just find instances of bad textbooks, of bad teachers, of poor education, expose them, and have them corrected. And I'm sorry, we are painting here a very bleak picture, and I'm not sure I totally agree with it, because I think there's a lot we can do, and there's more than that we can do on that, and it's very important. Now, on the strategic level, I think, you know, you guys have given a couple of very, very good answers. First of all, every good manager will tell you that if you want a good product, a good service, you have to design a good process. So as Nomi said, we've got to get stuck into the process, you know, who's producing these textbooks, what is there besides the textbook that needs to be dealt with, how can this be dealt with, all this process. We've got to correct things at the process level as well, okay? And then you said, Jonathan, and quite rightly, you mentioned the legislation, and that's also very, very important on the strategic level. You know, is the law as it is today a good law, fit for purpose? And if it is, then how can we properly enforce it? Because my understanding is it's not sufficiently well enforced these days. We're very fortunate to be living in a place where there's rule of law. Okay, not everybody is so fortunate as Marcus said, and we're blessed. We've got to use that blessing in the right way. And you know, I'm sorry, I'm going to say something that you know, there's a lot of people, I can see there's a lot of people who are watching this webinar. Well, it's not enough. I thank you very much, first of all, for watching it, but it's not enough to watch it. We need to be doing things. And it's not, you know, this is not a task for Noru or for David or for Jonathan. This is a task for you. I know I'm looking a bit like that poster of Lord Kitchener, just without the moustache, but it's for you. You've got to do it. Where you find it, where you come across it, you start dealing with it. Ask for help but start dealing with it, and we can do much more. If this is important to you, if the survival of our culture, of our community, of our people is important to you, if your children and your children's children being Jewish is important to you, then this is one issue, education, where you need to act.
Okay.
That's my pep talk.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that, Noru. Perhaps we can turn to Nomi as to what we should be doing, and perhaps pick up one or two questions that are coming in from members of the audience. You mentioned, Nomi, the importance of the exam boards. What's the best way of getting to our concerns across to them? Do you have any suggestions on that? Also, can teachers' trade unions be of any assistance, or is that likely to be more of a problem than the solution? And perhaps more generally, are there people in teaching who we can work with rather than against to get better results, and perhaps try and strengthen the positive rather than push against the negative? Is that any possible way forward?
Wow, that's a lot of questions. I agree with you about trade unions. I think that would be a dead end. How to get to the boards, I don't know at this moment, but I can certainly find out, because I know somebody who is on one of the boards on a science subject, and I'm sure she could tell me, so I can share it with you all when I find out. Okay. I think the best way forward is to look at all the books that are out there. If all the boards have produced books, we need to look at them all. At the moment, I feel it's rather haphazard. Somebody says, oh, I've come across this book, let's review it. So we really need to look at them all. And then we need to rewrite them. But we can only do that, as I said, when we know a bit more about their marking schemes and all this sort of thing. And we need to know a lot about the way education happens these days. You know, I think when all of you were, even though you're all younger than me, when you were at school, we had textbooks with a few maps, pretty pictures, but now it's so different. I mean, as you and both of David and Noru will know, they're very pretty and they stimulate thought and argument and so on. And we have to do that, but who else is going to do it if not us? Because there are very few really knowledgeable people around. So I think this is terribly important, to make sure we do it in conjunction with the boards who we have to educate. I also think we need more knowledgeable speakers going around the country. I know there are a few groups here and there, but there are thousands and thousands of schools, and between us we are not reaching them all. And I just wish there were more knowledgeable people who could give their time occasionally, not every day, and get into the schools and talk. And of course, I know there are speakers around who are, I can think of somebody who's very provocative, very argumentative, and that is not the way to put the truth out there. I think there's a whole, as I said, the whole project of Wikipedia and Google. And I wish somebody who's sitting at home, well, we're all sitting at home, can do something about that. And also, as was it David said, I don't know, as Noru said, it's up to everybody. Every time we see something in the media, we have to write in. Even if they don't publish our letter, at least the editor will know. Does that answer all your questions? I don't know.
Well, it answers quite a lot of the questions I asked. There are more coming in from the audience. Okay. But perhaps can I turn to Marcus, because we put on one side earlier the situation in the Palestinian Authority and Palestinian textbooks. But perhaps can we pick that up now and ask what is the current position and whether there's any improvement, and what you find are the difficulties and barriers to getting things done, and what you try and do to overcome them.
Okay, so the Palestinian curriculum was entirely rewritten between 2014 and 2016. Palestinians, by the way, received the Ministry of Education in 2000 following the Oslo Accords. It was never a great curriculum. The curriculum which emerged in 2016 is by far the most extreme set of textbooks we see in the Middle East, and actually I include Iran in that. It is a curriculum where the idea of peace has been entirely removed. There is no concept of peace with Israel. There's no concept of the Israeli other, the Jewish other. Peace treaties, which used to be in the Palestinian curriculum, have essentially been erased. So as far as the Palestinian child is concerned, the Palestinians have barely had any peace talks whatsoever with Israelis. What is instead? Instead is radicalization, extremism across every single subject and every single grade, including maths, by the way, including physics. In maths, children are asked to add up martyrs from the first intifada and second intifada. How many martyrs have you got? So that's grade 3, 9-year-olds. In physics, they're taught Newton's second law by use of a slingshot. They're told in, and not just in religious studies, not just in Islamic studies, but in Arabic and in social studies, that death is a privilege. This is actually a Salafi idea. You know, the Palestinian Authority is a Fatah-led organization, a nationalist-led organization, and yet Salafi ideas are in the Palestinian curriculum. And imagine that for a moment. You are saying to young people, your life is worthless, essentially. Your only role in life is to commit acts of violence on behalf of the Palestinian Authority, to sacrifice yourself, and they're told that they will get 72 virgins in heaven if they do that. You know, this cliche of 72 virgins is in the Palestinian curriculum in 2020. And young girls, in order to be equal with boys, guess what? They have to sacrifice themselves. So this is an extraordinarily radical, extreme curriculum, but it is different to any of the others in the region. And the difference is that it is supported by Europeans. The money, the funding that goes to the Palestinian Ministry of Education comes mainly from the EU, but from individual European states, and of course the UK, which through DFID gives an enormous amount of money into the PACASE fund, which is an EU fund, and from there the majority, 60%, to the Palestinian Ministry of Education. What can we do about it? Okay, so just last Thursday, we drove legislation through the European Parliament, which stated very clearly that the Palestinian curriculum is extreme and EU money cannot be used to radicalize young Palestinians, number one. In the UK, there has been remarkable work done by members of Parliament through LFI, through CFI. ZF has done amazing work. You guys, UKLFI have done amazing work. You are all absolutely on this. And the UK it's not even pro-Israel, it is anti-extremist organizations, because that's what this curriculum is, have been remarkable in this. In the US, we have HR 2343 going through Congress at the moment, which says exactly the same as the European legislation. It should have gone through because of Corona. Obviously, everything slowed down in Washington. The Norwegian Parliament at the end of 2019 told the government that no more money can go to the Palestinian Ministry of Education until the curriculum has been changed. The Bundestag has commented on this, and the German Federal Foreign Ministry is absolutely on this. And in the end, Mogherini, you all remember Mogherini, no friend of Israel, a woman with a picture of Yasser Arafat on her wall, stated in 2019, March of 2019, that there needs to be a review of the Palestinian curriculum because of the hatred and the incitement in it. So all these things are happening. Will the PA stop? That's the big question. You know, we follow the PA extraordinarily carefully. Obviously, you know, the team is a fluent Arabic-speaking reading, writing team. We follow them on Facebook. Our feeling is this curriculum is incredibly important to them. It is, if you like, the touchstone of their national policy. And what is their national policy? One state, river to the sea, no Israel. You know, again, these sound like cliches, but you see it incredibly clearly in the curriculum because there's no Israel. Whenever you see a map, it's all of Palestine. They are told that Haifa is Palestine. They're told that Tel Aviv is Palestine. So it's very clear that they're talking about this one state of Palestine, that Israel will cease to exist. It will be gained through jihad, through ribat, which is Arabic for, basically for terrorism. It's too important to the Palestinian Authority to ditch just like that. And as Noru said, education is so important, even more so in the Middle East when these textbooks come from the state. What will it take for the PA to change? I do not know, but I do know that when you're going around British schools, maybe it will be interesting for British school children to know what Palestinian school children are learning. And if so, please go on our website, look at our report on the Palestinian curriculum. Very simple messages there. Feel free to share them.
Well, congratulations, Marcus, on your achievements. And getting things through the European Parliament that are in any way critical of the Palestinian Authority is quite extraordinary. And to get 3 in one day is amazing. And as you also mentioned, to get people like Mogherini to accept that there's a real problem and that it needs to be addressed is also fantastic. And people viewing from the UK, and one thing you can do is keep pressing members of Parliament about this, because undoubtedly they need to be reminded and pressed and pointed out if they're not already aware of the seriousness of this problem. And without ending it, there's not going to be any proper peace. One of the questions that's been asked is, at what age should children be, or students be taught about the history of the Middle East? And what stage do they get indoctrinated beyond repair? Or is it something that really is best not taught until the age of 40, like the Zohar? Or because it's so difficult and dangerous, or is it something that you really ought to start teaching at a very young age, or somewhere in between? And Nomi, what would be your take on that as to what's the best thing to do?
Well, we started just with sixth form. The idea is to catch the kids just before they went on to uni, so they'd have, you know, a bit of ammunition. But now that it's not in most A-level board, you know, it's only one of them, I think, does it at A-level. And it's the GCSE books that we're talking about at the moment. And so we reluctantly started going to talk to 15-year-olds. And no, they're not too young. One just hopes they will remember, but they're certainly not too young to understand it. Does that answer it?
Yeah, I'm just looking through some of the questions. Another question that's being asked is, well, you know, we've got an existing problem, which even if we were to double or triple or quadruple our efforts, would, if it's not getting worse, would take many years to change. What would be the best way of speeding up change? David, any ideas on that?
A couple of things. Coming on to something Nomi said actually when she was talking about the books. Look, we've just come out of a successful campaign. We've spent the last 4 years fighting down anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And one of the reasons that it worked was because we weren't alone. Anti-Semitism is a symptom. It's not a problem as of itself, it's a symptom of a deeper underlying problem. And certainly within the West, it's an anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist issue. Now, these books that are being written that we're checking them because they're talking about the Middle East and Israel. But what about the other books? It's a question of finding alliances. I'm telling you now, if these books are being rewritten in a certain way, then so are other books. so are other history books, and other peoples are also being impacted. The fight against Corbyn worked because lots of people didn't like him for lots of different reasons. That mindset, and it's the same mindset, which is why I keep referring to it, is a threat to our society and our value system and our histories and everything that we're doing. So it's not just about us. So if we sit there saying like we're alone and we're in this, you know, just by ourselves, and we have to deal, you're right, it's a massive, massive problem. I was on Wikipedia the other day. Now, Wiki's used by, my kids use Wiki. As much as I scream at them and tell them not to, they still use it. I was on Wiki and they're talking about a quote from the mayor of Jerusalem from 100 and something years ago, where he turns around and he says, of course it's the Jews' land, effectively. He basically turns around, why shouldn't the Jews come? This is their land. That's the quote. So I went to Wiki, and in Wiki the quote says, this is also their land, right? Now that's a major shift. That's in Wiki. Now Wiki gives the source of the material. So you follow through the link to the source of the material, and of course the actual quote has no also. So, and I've had issues, too many issues with Wiki to count. There's still a massacre that took place on the 1st of January 1948 in not far from Haifa that never happened. That's still called a massacre on the pages of Wiki because I can't get it changed. So I think what we need to do is build alliances. I really do. I think it's about finding other communities, other peoples, other ideologies that are affected by this, just the same way as we did with Corbyn, and running at it together. Because if we stand alone, if it's just a few thousand or a few tens of thousands of active Jews fighting against them, and we are so outnumbered, we'll never get anywhere. So it really is, I think, about looking and seeing where we can work with other groups, where we can work with other people, other interests, and try to pick it up from there.
Marcus, do you have any comments on that, based on your experience of getting a coalition together in relation to Palestinian textbooks, for example, or indeed your other work, about how best we can mobilise more than just our own community?
Well, I mean, firstly, the work that that I know David and Noru have done in taking on individual books, turning to the publishers and getting retractions, getting changes, you know, that's frankly as good as it gets. That is, you know, absolutely what is necessary. The problem, you know, is exactly as David said. Pearson has how many thousands of books in I don't know how many subjects. You know, to troll through those, you know, from sociology to history to geography to social studies, I think that is where the coalition is necessary. If you know, to rope in as many people as possible, you know, ultimately people have children in schools studying, and to rope in as many people as possible to troubleshoot, to find, you know, where the problems might be, because there, you know, there are resources to do that kind of work. And I think, you know, David and Noru are you know, clearly exemplary at this. They could, I'm sure, train other people to do this, and it can be widened out. But finding the books, as David said, is the issue. You know, with us, it's a different matter. In a sense, it's kind of easier, because we have a finite, you know, amount of countries, if you like, and curricula which tend to change every year. And we are on countries in the whole curricula. I give an example: Saudi Arabia. We just reviewed their curriculum now, and we're not happy. This is in the time of MBZ, as the Americans say, who is reaching out to the Jewish community in America. It clearly has strategic relationships with Israel, wants the Vision 2030, the Saudi Vision 2030, to be part of, you know, part of the new Saudi state, and does want change in those textbooks, but we haven't seen them. And so, you know, to a small extent, we saw changes, but there's anti-Semitism in those textbooks, which has absolutely no reason to be there in 2020. So we've pulled them up on it. Now we get to review again in September. September 2020, when there will be new books. And we can, check book by book where the changes have been made. If they haven't been made, we have our ways of, getting to them and, seeing what we can do moving forward. So, entirely different situation. But I think if you expand this even continentally, you're talking about the UK, and yes, Pearson is the elephant in the room when it comes to textbook publishing. But, France has problems of its own. Belgium, I know from Nigel and the amazing work they do there, clearly problems, especially in the Flemish books. I think then, there really does need to be a global amalgamation of people involved in this. I, by the way, haven't even got to the United States, which is so complicated because there they have school boards. Imagine how many school boards there are in the United States, how much they differ. Newton, Massachusetts has been fighting for 3 years to get changes to one book. Southern California, they managed to get a book taken off. But still, there needs to be a global amalgamation coming together of people who are using UNESCO standards. And I come back to this because institutions, authorities recognize that those UNESCO standards do carry weight. So it's not just necessarily an argument of he said, she said, but books which clearly show no respect for the Jewish other, books which do not show peacemaking as a way to resolve conflict, books which have historical narratives which are clearly inaccurate and can be proved to be so. I think it will take people coming together from all of those places, including the US, and frankly, quite a lot of financial backing to get the changes that need to be made. When it comes to the Arab world, the Muslim world, it's an entirely different game. It is a game that we are on. That will be a long haul. But I think in the Western world, there needs to be, frankly, an umbrella organization putting this stuff together.
Yes, and actually some of the audience have mentioned issues in Italy and Ireland, and no doubt there are problems in a lot of other countries as well. But I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Our hour has filled up. We hope this has been an interesting and informative webinar, and that it will help drive things forward a bit on this very important issue. And I'd like to thank all of our excellent speakers. And if members of the audience would like to thank them personally or criticise them, please leave comments and we'll pass them on. Coming up next Tuesday, my colleague Natasha Hausdorff will discuss Israel, territory and international law with Professor Avi Bell. Do reserve your places for an expert analysis of this subject, which is a particularly hot topic in view of the proposals in the Trump peace plan and in the Israeli government coalition agreement. And thank you all for watching today. The webinar is free, but if you'd like to make a donation to help cover our costs of this and other work, please do click on the donate button on our emails or on our website at www.uklficharity.com. Thank you.